demonstrations against President Hosni Mubarak.
قرار السيد الرئيس محمد حسني مبارك بالتخلي عن منصب رئيس الجمهورية.
هو السيد محمد مرسي رئيس العراق.
weekly program BelAhdan, the show that brings you General Omega watch to your living room. We all hear about the CC leaks, all these leaks coming out of an interview done by a military correspondent with General Sisi, the man. The Sisi maniac was sweeping Egypt. Everybody was singing about the Sisi and how he really got rid of the Brotherhood, the new terrorist, the threat to Egypt. Sisi was the hero until we all hear now about his leaks and his interview that really comes across a very naive and kind of a shallow general, talks about dreams and the Sadat that he really came to in his dreams and tell him you're going to be president. He was holding a red sword and he was wearing an Omega watch, and it's just like somebody in the farm talking on Mastaba. And people were wondering where that come from and who made that leaks, and if this is the leader going to save Egypt, we are in big, big trouble. We have Professor Ahmad Atif Ahmad is a professor of religious study of University of California in South California, Santa Barbara. I had this interview with him about the Egyptian revolution, a historical perspective. How is it different than the other revolution? Is it still a revolution? And we have this interview, so enjoy it, and we'll come back after the interview. So don't go away. Assalamu alaikum.
The only way to say anything about what's going on, people are not satisfied. The expression, the revolution continues, ثورة مستمرة, has been expressed since the first army transitional government, which lasted about 16 months after the Mubarak resignation. And with the second army rule, it seems to be also going in the same direction. I ask my friends and family, even though this is, of course, nothing like a comprehensive induction or anything like that, but they seem to be all tired at this point, and almost they use accusatory tones when they talk about the people who still like going out in the streets. Maybe I know the kinds of people who would rather not revolt, but there are other people who say that they can never stop going out in demonstrations.
I think a lot of people not talking about how the last two revolution or two revolt or two whatever are different or similar to what happened in the modern Egyptian history.
2011 definitely bears some similarities to 2019. The surprise elements, the fact that everybody came gradually for a cause, even though the cause needed an explanation then, and that is in 1919 and also in 2011. Different people probably had different reasons to come out. 1919 is always talked about in history books as a revolution against the British occupation, and gradually the protest had to do with understanding that the Saad Zaghloul and other representatives of Egypt who thought that the end of First World War was a good moment to talk about independence, these people have been treated badly, and it was to protest the refusal of their ideas and so on. And we don't have any leader like that in 2011, or a group of leaders. But there's also the surprise, the element of rejecting now the so-called, the republic that supposedly ended the British occupation. So the first one was to reject the British occupation. The second one was to reject the alternative. But there are very few similarities, at least between the initial events of 2011 and 1919 on the one hand, and, for example, 1882, the Arabi Revolution, 1952. There are historians of Egypt who compare 1952 and 1882 in that in both cases something begins in the army. So Arabi was not happy because the Circassians and the the people who are talked about are non-ethnic Egyptians, Circassians, Turks and so on, were enjoying the high ranks in the army. And in the case of Nasser in 1952, it was the ultimate control was still by the king and the British government, which also made the army simply a tool of this kind of occupation. So it was a revolt inside the army that got generalized. But I think your larger point probably is that none of these comparisons is going to tell us anything about uh, about Egypt. There's nothing essential about any of that. It's the people are in a rejection mood now, and they seem to be able to do that regularly. Maybe it's not unfair to say at least modern Egyptians and modernity in this sort of academic sense, we just go back to the Napoleon invasion, that this population seems to change a lot. Of course, the population used to be around maybe 5 million people at the time of the beginning of the 19th century, and now it's 20 times that, close to 100 million. So the population is increasing. Its connections to the world is becoming more entangled and complicated. But while all this is happening, the people are in a dissatisfied mode. They keep rejecting the options that they're getting. But see, so the whole discussion about coup d'etat and revolution really shows the inadequacy of the paradigms, right? So whether it's John McCain or other people, people are so loyal to what they studied in school. There has to be this model of an army replacing an elected president, and that would be a coup. Or otherwise, it's a popular movement that changes everything gradually, of course, right? Because none of the large revolutions are really considered revolutions except in light of what happens later. So the Iranian Revolution, one of the most important revolutions in recent time, the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the French Revolution, and revolutionary cannot really tell us what the revolution will lead to. Somebody else will. And this is what irritates a lot of people who are expecting the sort of the beautiful faces of the revolution, the youth and the educated people and the well-spoken people who are talking about democracy and values of freedom and so on. These people couldn't lead the country after that. It had to fall either to an Islamic oligarchy or a military oligarchy, and these.
So the main forces driving revolution is changing the present, the past, or to put a roadmap for the future.
Well, the revolutionaries, thought about the future, but it is hard to turn that thinking into something else. I mean, everybody talked about Egypt becoming a superpower, regional power, and which meant for them, of course, mimicking the existing powers, right? So it's a competition with the United States or with China or with some power they imagine. But look, there is no PhD in the future. There is no specialization in the future, but there is also no non-academic way of doing the future. So the future will happen when it happens. At this point, we can only describe what happened. What happened is that the Egyptian population, I think, is unusually dissatisfied. It is unique in the world today by its capacity to reject the multiple alternatives that are presented to it. But and it seems that the energy is still there. In the newspapers all the time, without the mobilization by the defeated forces of the Muslim Brothers, nothing will happen. And I don't know that that's true. Maybe a lot of spontaneous action going on, and you and I can't even describe, even after it happens, it's very hard to describe it accurately.
Let's look at the role of Islamists or Islam in all of this. I mean, it seems like the Jan 2011's revolution was mostly secular. The Brotherhood or Islamists were behind the scene. Maybe later on they joined in, but very much was a secular youth-driven revolution, and then all of a sudden the Islamist, kind of stepped in, and actually they showed their muscles, and they proved that the only organized institution or entity that they can stand for to the military and the deep state. And then they actually came to power, and the deep state defeated them again. So what?
I mean, it's hard for me to think of the Muslim Brothers as anything but a secular group, right? It's an Islamic group, but it is also a secular group in the sense that I mean, yeah, it maybe the category of Islamic to me doesn't mean more than a certain vernacular, a certain language, and an attempt to negotiate uh, some room for the group to make it distinct from others. It doesn't mean, by the way, of course, that I believe that the religion itself doesn't exist. I mean, it exists, but it exists more on a social level and actually in the national organisms of the state. So my understanding, my theory of the sources of conservatism or the appeal to tradition in Egypt, they come from two sources. One is the social sort of foundation that exists all over the society. There are still families and individuals and communities and areas, rural and urban,
Culture.
that don't want to change completely and abandon certain aspects of tradition. So they are one source of conservatism. And one is the nation itself. The nationalist project has always appropriated religion and has used it and actually supported aspects of it that were not considered important in, say, in the Ottoman stage of Egyptian history or even before. So are Islamic in the sense that they're interested in the language of Islamic unity. I don't know, maybe their project would have led to some kind of League of Eastern Nations or League of Muslim Nations that includes Turkey and Pakistan, but we haven't seen that. But they're secular for sure in that they don't really have an alternative to the secular ways of doing politics. So, of course, there's work in academic scholarship that negates the idea of a Muslim state. There is no such a thing as a Muslim state or an Islamic state. There can only be a kind of secular state, the only kind that we know, maybe with some role for religion.
That's the beauty of modern nation state. It became so dogmatic, and it became a religion by itself. I mean, it seems like you could go and invade another country to spread democracy, or you can use the secular language in a more fundamentalist or as fundamentalist as the Islamist or the religious in general. So is a nation state now under criticism or under the gun?
I agree exactly with what you said. Just like the religious activists are essentially secular when it comes to political activities, or we can't really describe them otherwise. It's true also that some secular ideologies that used to mean a rejection of religion because of its dogmatism have become more dogmatic and have become essentially religions. So this is the world that we're living in. The distinction between religion and secularism is very hard, and it's something that the academics have noticed a while back, but it has become, I think, now popular knowledge. It's not that hard to explain that it is true that some nations are essentially function as religions. And they defend themselves as religions, and they can't really negotiate. They have this I mean, their metaphysics is, of course, strange and different. It's not about believing in an afterlife or anything like that, but making this life as sacred as the afterlife. I think part of this is old. Collective identification in general, whether through religion or nation or even other ways of identifying that may have gone beyond religion and nation. I mean, the Bedouins, for example, always struggled with being part of any religion or any nation. There are always actors that just sort of hesitate and have different loyalties and so on. But the individual there within these entities could have loyalty to the group. And if war is going to be involved, if dying is a possibility, then it becomes sort of a religion to the extent that we mean by that word. We're describing now religion as something that could allow the individual to give up his life and sort of expect that and be almost not happy, but willing to do it. But the modern nation, I mean, of course, we are also at the tail again, back to in academic scholarship. There's a lot of attack on the modern nation. The modern nation has been unusually brutal, people say. It's more brutal than any medieval entity that looks like a state. The medieval state, of course, didn't have the ability to, that capacity for surveillance and control, and there was no citizenship or borders or any of these things, and people could just travel freely. And there's some nostalgia about the medieval structure of social life, but there were also moments of war and moments of suspicion and things like treason. Maybe they were not called treason in some cases in the Islamic version of things. An apostate really is. An apostate is not somebody who's against, who expresses free opinion against the rest of the society. I think this will just stay with human nature. Now we're suspicious of everything. I think what's new, there are skepticism about religion and skepticism about nation, and we're waiting for something new, maybe a globalized way of identification that will weaken both categories of nation and religion, or not equally necessarily all over the globe. In some areas they will be weaker than others.
That's global Islam. When you look at that, when you look how the Muslim reaction to, let's say, the Prophet film, whatever that ridiculous film, it was a global reaction. So there is a sense of Islamic identity all over the world. It hasn't really galvanized to have a collective, conscious or collective way of reacting to things. So there is a possibility there, and the idea of the West. What is the West? I mean, there's another identity. You can see Europe can fight with each other on everything, but when it comes to dealing with Muslims or Reform, they all unified, no matter what. So is there something like that?
Right. These are moving targets, but I think you're right. Until today, there is more unity than disunity among Europeans in rejecting the people who they call unintegrated Muslims living in Europe. Now that has got to be something like a collective identification. I asked people in the past. I was in Eastern Germany once a while back, and I was asking, well, what is the problem with having all these Turks?
Yeah.
And actually, it was a person from Vienna at the time, and he said, "We don't understand them. We don't understand how they resolve their disputes or how they deal with their issues." I think there was talk about domestic violence and so on. Domestic violence happens, of course, in all families, but there is a certain fear that if it happens in a Muslim family, it has to be stopped immediately. Of course, the way people put it is that domestic violence happens more frequently among Turkish families or Muslim families, but there's something irrational there and something very essentialized and something from the past. And the same is true when it comes to these group activities condemning this or that. That's something. I think the lesson is that the colonial is still alive and well. People still have the wounds and they feel the wounds of the past and of injustice and so on. And that seems to take a little longer than people wanted.
Yesterday I think Moses, let my people go in Egypt, let the Constitution, and I know you looked at it, and I know
the Constitution is not written for the average person. It's not written for me or for you. It's written for two audiences only: the lawmakers and the Constitutional Court. And the lawmakers will think of it as a ceiling, right? So this is the document that limits you. You can't propose legislation or accept legislation that goes against this document. And who's going to verify that or provide the review if the lawmakers make a mistake? It's the Constitutional Court. So, for example, 1971, the Constitution that introduced for the first time what we call the Sharia clause, Article 2 said that Sharia is the main principle and the main source of Egyptian law. used to be A and then became the main foundation or the main source, مصدر الرئيس. And that really weighted an interpretation, and the Constitutional Court in 1980 said that the only people who will interpret what Sharia means are the members of the Constitutional Court. So now we know that at that time we knew that it's not an Azhari scholar or some kind of a person with religious qualification who will tell us what Sharia is. That was important, and it took the subsequent 30 years or so for this to be understood in detail.
But how about how they treat the military? It seems like you take the Sharia out and you bring the military in. So
right, but it's not so much that actually I don't think that is true. There, in terms of declaring war, if I remember correctly, there are two situations. One is the presence of what they call Majlis al-A'la lid-Difa', right? The Supreme Defense Council. And that one is headed by the president himself and has the prime minister as a member and has certain ministers, or the secretary, the foreign secretary and the police secretary, what they call them, the Wazir al-Dakhliya, the Minister of the Interior. So if only in the absence of this council, then you move to al-Quwat al-Musallaha. It's actually not explained very well in the Constitution what constitutes the Supreme Council for the Armed Forces. The problem now with what will become the 2014 Constitution is that it doesn't decide certain issues. And we are reading in newspapers that the current temporary president will solve these issues by himself, which will open the door, of course, for his action to be reviewed by courts in the future. Some of this relates to quotas for women, for Christians, and so on, and for peasants and workers. And some of it relates to the elections themselves, elections for parliament, and so on. So most of what will be decided outside of the Committee of the 50, if it is decided by the current president, I think will be subjected to review later. Maybe the Constitutional Court in the future will accept what this president will do, but it could also be invalidated.
was Professor Atif Ahmad, from University of Southern California, Santa Barbara, is talking about revolution in Egypt and the Constitution and what have you. And also, you always do the stuff, try to do your things as a journalist, but when it hits personal, I just got the news that my nephew was taken away during the crackdown on the Brotherhood in, the notorious Rabaa al-Adawiyya and Nahda squares, and he's been in jail since August. And I didn't know what to do and how to, handle this. And but this sweet 19 years old kid taken away from his family, his school, missing out, and put him in jail with common criminal and 25 people in the small cell, and have been there, no due process, no verdict, or no charges yet, and it's been a horrible time for his family. And I'm sure there's thousands of people also that are having the same fate. I had the chance to talk to my nephew's family. His name is Hassan al-Adawi, and this interview with the family and how they feel about having their son detained away without any due process. Watch this interview. We'll see you next week. Assalamu alaikum, and God bless you all. يعني بتجيب الصبر والقوة والحاجات ان انت عارفة ان ليكي ابن يعني وقع عليه الظلم ومحبوس
والله انا مش عايزه اقول لك ان احنا الواحد بيستمد قوته منه. يعني انا لما بزوره بستمد القوة والصبر منه.
لما بشوفه يعني ما كانش يعني يديني انطباع ان هو عنده اهتمامات يعني او شخصيته يعني مبنية على شخصية دينية يعني.
لا خالص. ده يعني كان ممكن يصلي فرض ويسيب واحد كده.
شوف 4.
والله، وكان نادر جدا لما يصلي الفجر دي، لما يكون قاعد مثلا قدام النت والفجر جدا ابوه يقول له قوم صلي.
يا حسن طول عمره راجل ومع الحق، انما هو لا متطرف، مش متطرف في اي حاجه، هي رجوله منه.
والله يعني هو عادة كان قليل الكلام، ممكن بيعمل يحب الحاجات العملي أكتر من النظري. يحب دايما يعني يفكر، ممكن يبتكر من صغره، ممكن أي إصلاحات يعملها لنا. يحب العمل بالإيد والدماغ كده في هدوء أكتر من الكلام.
ايه هي اللي عامله دبابيس زي دي عليها صوره حسن اهي، والحريه لحسن عبد الرافع، وعامله له بانر قد السور هتعمله له، مش عاوزه مليم من حد. الناس بتتحرك والناس بس في وسط الناس دي في حراره، الحراره دي بتعمل.
يعني أنا بنشوف، احنا بنروح نزور حسن بنشوف عيال في الإعدادية محبوسين. طب العيال في الإعدادية ديت يعني عنده فكر إيه ولا سياسة إيه عشان يتحبس يعني؟
لك نص البلد اتحبست والنص التاني بيروح يزورهم. الايام اللي احنا بنروحها بنلاقي جماهير بتزور.
أنا شايف إن في خير. الشباب بقى عاقل جدا، و ويعني أنا متفائل منهم، وإن شاء الله يعني مصر هتبقى كويسة جدا، لأن فعلا في تغيير في مصر حصل يعني.
كل واحد في موال، يعني بقول لك بشوف حسن دلوقتي في السجن اكتر ما كنت بشوفه هو في بيتنا.
15,000 مقبوض عليه ولا فوق يعني. 15,000 مش كلهم مش اخوات، ده كلهم ناس عاديين جدا.
بيطلعوا متعصبين اكتر لان الحريه مش تاخد، مش كمان تعبيرهم عن الحريه ده خلاص يعني. اكتر اتذلوا اكتر من اللي بره كمان.
مع ان بصراحه يعني المراه هنا، المراه المصريه اثبتت ان هي احسن اجدع من الراجل. يعني عندنا بص على المظاهرات 3/4 ستات محترمات.
يعني ربنا يصبرنا ان شاء الله، وعلى امل بالدعاء يعني ان ربنا يرحمنا من اللي بيحصل ويرد الحق لاصحابه بس.
ماما الله يرحمها كانت لما يحصل حد من الجيران يكلمنا ولا يعتدي علينا، كانت ماما بتعمل ايه؟ كانت دايما هي الحماس والرجولة، هي اللي كانت بتعلمنا ازاي يعني ناخد حقنا وندافع عن نفسنا ويبقى عندنا كرامة.
يعني بنتمنى ليكي والحسن والمصر التوفيق يعني.
يا رب، اللهم امين ان شاء الله. ان
إن
شاء
شاء الله.
الله.
Nightingale, sing us a song of a love that once belonged. Nightingale, tell me your tale. Was your journey far too long? Does it seem like I'm looking